Yo, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to a brand new video on the channel. Inside of today's video, we have another sneak peek for you guys before tomorrow's update. So this is going to be with Chester. So we're going to be going through all of his stats and then also his best counters and the best brawlers that he actually has a really good matchup against. So to begin with, Chester has 4,950 HP. He has a fast movement speed. He can deal 1,080 damage per bell, and with his star power, he can actually shoot 4 bells. So every single shot, it changes the sequence. So it'll go from 1 bell, 2 bells, 3 bells, and then 4. So you can technically deal 4,320 damage with 1 piece of ammo, which is absolutely insane. And it takes 6 hits to get his super. So now, moving on to his gadgets then. So the first gadget is going to be called Spicy Dice. So with Spicy Dice, he gets a new random super that is different from his current one. So if you don't like one of his supers, he has 5 supers. I'll be going through them shortly. If you don't like one of those, you can just switch it up. And then moving on to his other gadget called Candy Beans. So with Candy Beans, he eats a mystery flavored candy bean, which will give him a random buff for 5 seconds. So this can be either reload, damage, HP, or speed. So 4 random buffs, which is actually pretty good for 5 seconds. And then moving into both star powers. And so the first one is called Bell-O-Mania. So with Bell-O-Mania, he gets an extra stage. So that means normally without star power, you only get the maximum 3 bells. Now you get 4 bells, which is definitely going to be the better star power. His other one, you get to see what his super will actually be, which is okay, but the Bell-O-Mania is definitely needed. So now moving through his 5 different supers. The first one being called Candy Popper. So it's literally like a dynamite super, deals 2,820 damage, also destroys environments, and probably a little bit of smaller of a radius in comparison to dynamite super, but pretty decent. And the next one is basically like a long range shot, well, kind of long range, but it straight away stuns the opponent for around 3 seconds and deals 2,000 damage, which is actually pretty decent, specifically in a game most like Brawl, where you want to stun the opponent and get the ball off them. Next one is basically like a smaller cone of Ems's regular attack, but it only deals 430 damage per second. Well, it has 7 different ticks, so I'll say only. That's actually quite a considerable amount over time, but it's not really a good amount of damage up close, straight away. It is over time. Next one is like a mini lose super. It will stay on the ground for around, I think it's around 10 seconds and dealing 2,040 damage every single time, but it's a lot smaller radius as a lose super, but still can be pretty useful, especially in hot zone. And the last one, it is Chester basically pops a candy, and then over 3 seconds he heals 3,600. So 5 really good supers there. Okay, so now moving on to the good matchups for Chester, starting off with Sandy. So I feel like overall Chester's going to be an incredibly strong brawler, so I feel like every matchup is near enough winnable for him, by the way. But in particular, I think Sandy's going to be a good matchup for him, just because if you equip the vision gear, but also because of the Bell-O-Mania star power, it's going to be really easy to scout out a Sandy, specifically in that super. But overall, I just feel like in the lane, Chester should easily be able to beat Sandy, specifically because he can deal 4,000 damage plus with that star power, which is absolutely insane. I just feel like you're going to be able to keep the range pretty much easily against Sandy. And then once you start to get towards, your 3 bells or your 4 bells, you can really push up against a Sandy and just delete them so quickly. Okay, so next up for another great matchup for Chester, it is Sam. So I feel like overall Chester's going to be really good against tanks. Not at all times he'll have like a super available which he can stun a tank brawler, so of course he's not going to be insane all of the time against tanks, but I think overall tanks are going to really feed his super pretty well. There are of course a couple of ways you can defeat tanks pretty easily with Chester, being his 3rd and 4th level. That's like 3k damage and then 4k damage straight away. So if a tank is pushing Chester, they're going to get deleted pretty much instantly if he is in that sequence, so got to bear that in mind. And then you can also use the Candy Beans gadget. A lot of the times he will be getting a reload buff or a damage buff, and that's just going to be so impossible for a brawler like Sam to really deal with. And then again, you could get the opportunity to get the kind of stun super, and then tanks are just going to have no chance against Chester. Okay, so next up for another easy matchup for Chester, we have Gale. So I feel like Gale overall is going to be an easy matchup for everyone, but I think in particular this one's going to be a little bit easier. So I think the attack range is pretty similar for both of these, but the damage department is going to be so much easier for a Chester to deal with a Gale. It's going to be a lot easier for Chester to get his super as well. I think this is going to be such an easy matchup. I kind of struggled to really pinpoint any crucial matchups here because, again, I think Chester's going to be the best brawler in the game, if not a top 5 brawler easily. It's so so easy to tell sometimes when you just pick up a brawler, you know, how easy he is to use, the amount of damage he can output, 5 different supers, 2 really good gadgets, and a really strong star power. I just don't see how Chester's not going to have a favorable matchup against pretty much every single brawler in the game. Okay, so next up for the great matchups for Chester, we have Mortis. So Mortis is going to be pretty easy for Chester to deal with. Again, mainly because of the 3rd and 4th sequence. So if Mortis wants to go aggro on Chester, he's got to do it within the first 2 sequences because it won't deal the most damage. But again, once you start to ramp up to the 3rd and 4th bell, we could easily, as a Chester, just kind of save that 3rd and 4th sequence. And Mortis can't do anything. There's just no way he's going to be able to take him down. Again, that's like 7k damage between them 2 sequences. Up close, you know, Mortis isn't going to be able to deal with it. You've also got a couple of really good supers that can really hurt a Mortis. You know, Mortis isn't the greatest against these type of brawlers. So I think Chester versus Mortis, Chester should easily be able to wipe the floor with him. Okay, and lastly, for the great matchups for a Chester, we have Ems. So again, I didn't want to be too boring and just go for like the complete worst brawlers in the meta. Of course, Chester's going to be able to deal with those pretty easily, but I think down the lane, I think Chester should be able to win this matchup most of the time. Again, you should just be able to walk up to an Ems and completely melt her once you start ramping up those sequences. I say this time and time again, but it's just, I feel like it's so important to really know how to use that star power. You know, the other one might feel okay, but Bellomania, it's just insane damage. You've got to make good usage of it. You've also got a good super which can break open lanes only a little bit, but the more the map is opened up, it's going to be a little bit easier to outrange a brawler like Ems. So again, I feel like Chester's just going to have such an easy matchup against Ems. Okay, so next up for the brawlers that now counter Chester, I felt like it was pretty hard to really make this video because I feel like Chester can really win any matchup. I think he's that strong of a brawler, but I think Ash, out of all tanks, probably have more so the better of the matchups against him, mainly because of his rats. And again, it's all dependent on the tanky brawlers facing off against Chester to kind of wait for his 1st and 2nd sequence. That's when, as a player, you should kind of be pinpointing, you know, when he doesn't have that 3rd and 4th sequence available. When he's at the 1st and 2nd stage, he deals like no damage, so you need to go in quickly. So that's brawlers like Daryl, Buzz, you know, have those stun mechanics where you need to be really fast and get on top of him pretty quickly, or else once he starts getting to that 3rd and 4th stage, he's going to get deleted. But again, I think Ash is going to be the better of the tanks because he can close the gap pretty quickly. His rats can help tank, and his damage once he gets raged up is pretty substantial. Okay, so next up for another counter to Chester, it's a little bit boring, but Janet, you know, she's the best, one of the best brawlers in the game. She still will be with the update. I just feel like she has a little bit more range than a Chester, should be able to kind of out wall peek him a little bit easier. And then also, you know, if Chester starts to get up close to you, you've got your super to get away. You've also got the gadget to be a little bit annoying against the Chester. So I feel like in those 1v1 duels, Janet's going to win in the lane. Again, I think wall peeking is going to be a little bit better for her, but still, Chester can win it as well. It's just because of how strong I feel like this brawler is going to be, you have to beat it with meta brawlers. It's not like, you know, Chester's quite a ranged brawler. You know, some brawlers, you know, for example, like Buster, some counters can be pretty obvious because you can just go those tank counters, but with Chester, you know, there's always a way he can win the matchup. So still got to be pretty careful with Janet, but I feel like overall she'll have a good matchup. Okay, so next up for another brawler which should do pretty decently against Chester, it is Griff. So their attack range is pretty much similar or exactly the same. But I feel like the main reason why Griff should have an okay matchup against Chester is because of his business resilient star power. This will really allow him to push him back and keep the pressure. You know, it's really hard for a Chester to consistently deal damage against Griff, you know, with similar range, as I said. But again, I feel like Chester can still beat this matchup. It's not the hardest of counters. I really struggled to kind of come up with a complete hard counter for this brawler Chester because, you know, sometimes he may struggle in a matchup and then he might just get really lucky with one of his supers, you know, like the one that destroys environment, and that can really help him when his matchup. You know, he's also got a healing one that can heal 3,600. He can easily push back opponents so quickly. You know, all of a sudden he could just run up to an opponent and have the stun one and win every single matchup. You know, it's pretty hard to really hard counter Chester. He'll always have a trick up his sleeve. Okay, so next up with another counter for Chester, we have Otis. So I feel like Otis should have an okay matchup against Chester, mainly because of the fact that he outranges Chester. I checked it in the training cave. It definitely outranges him. So more so in the 1v1s, Otis should have a good matchup. But this is more theoretical. You know, Otis with the nerf, Otis seems like a small one, but maybe he becomes a much worse brawler. We'll have to see. But I think overall, Otis should have an okay matchup specifically once he starts to build up his super. You know, both Chester and Otis take a long time to build up their super, so you got to bear that one in mind. But I feel like overall Otis should have the better of the matchups. Okay, and moving on to the final counter for Chester. This actually could be one of the better counters for him. It has to be Grom. So I feel like Grom is going to be a really strong brawler with the new update, and I think throwers should have somewhat of a decent matchup against him until the game goes on. You know, I feel like maybe the meta may not suit throws too much, you know, with Griff, with also Gray with his gadget, and then also you've got the ability with Chester sometimes to break open the map. I feel like it's got to be really early game throwers can counter Chester, just because he doesn't have any kind of assassin capabilities, right? He isn't able to close the gap really quickly. He isn't able to break open walls really quickly, so that's why I see throwers as a viable counter to Chester. Alright guys, it's going to be it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed this one. So if you guys were wondering on the best build, then if you didn't already catch on from the video, we have Candy Beans. I think both of these gadgets are actually pretty decent. Both have its viability, but I think Candy Beans will be a little bit better just because you'll get that random buff which might really help you out in a 1v1. And then you have Bell Omania, that is 100% a better star power. And then again, it's pretty map dependent, but I think Vision Gear should actually be really strong on this new brawler. So that's going to be it for today's video. I think Chester is going to be a top 5 brawler, if not the best brawler in Brawl Stars. I think it's going to be really insane. So that's going to be it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And I'll see you guys next time.